Hello, today we are meeting Grant McFetridge and we'll be talking about peak states. Hello, Grant.
Hi.
You are the world expert on peak states, so this is my idea that you are the expert. So let's begin from the beginning. Mm-hmm. How that happened that you work in the institute and everything happened from the beginning. So it's a little bit of your history.
All right. Well, first, there's a lot of people working in that area of consciousness work, peak states and such. So I'm one of those people in the world. Yeah. We just have a different take on it than most. So what we're doing is different than pretty much anyone else. Okay.
So you were born with special phenomena. Because I know a little bit of history, so please explain how that happened.
I was very fortunate. Many in my extended family were born and live in kinds of consciousness that are unusual. The Native Americans in North America call it walking in beauty. So a person like that lives very differently than most people. Yeah, I just thought it was normal. Right? Because you're born that way, and then you see it in your relatives, and you think, well, okay. I didn't really realize that it wasn't normal until grade school, and when I was 15, I ran across some people that were like me, outside of the family.
Who was that?
I was working at a camp, a Boy Scout camp, and there were 3 of the counselors. They were older, and it was so exciting for me that there was someone else who understood, who also experienced that. And during the course of that summer, I realized that what I really wanted was to give that beauty way to other people. And they showed me, those 3 fellows, showed me that it could be acquired temporarily with music and singing and living in the outdoors, in the woods, and things like that. So that shaped my life. That told me that's truly what I wanted to do in life, is to give that to people. I didn't even know it was something to give, until I had that experience. So, but I didn't know how. Right? How? And so years went by, and I became an electrical engineer, and taught at a university, and did all sorts of things. But in the back of my mind going, how could I give this to other people? Because people suffer. And if you were like that, you don't suffer. Yeah. In fact, life is worth living without it. But, I didn't really know what to do. Is this what you wanted to hear?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Until 29. I divorced. I was in a divorce at age 29, and I lost my beauty way. So it was like being thrown into hell from heaven. Yeah. Didn't really know how bad it was without it, but at the same time, it was a very exciting moment because I went, aha, it's not genetic, because I couldn't have lost it otherwise, right? So that said, whatever it is, it's something that people can acquire because it isn't in the genes. So, So, on the one hand, I'm feeling really terrible. On the other hand, I'm feeling really happy and excited because now there's some way, this is something that people can have. See what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. So what did you start to do?
Well, I
search for that.
Yeah. So I'm an engineer, right? I do what engineers do. I say, let's go find it somewhere else. So I went to the different spiritual traditions, and I'm looking around, who knows what I'm talking about, and how do you get it, and what is it called? Yeah. And what I was really surprised by is, I was living in California, and there was just about everything you can imagine in California, and stuff you can't even imagine. And no one seemed to know what I was talking about, which surprised me. Spiritual traditions, psychology, they just didn't recognize what I was referring to.
Even the gurus and masters.
Talk. Yeah. So I was. So years went by, and I was learning different spiritual traditions and psychological techniques, trying to understand, what was going on. And finally, by accident, I came across. I found out that the Native Americans recognized what I was talking about. They called it Walking in Beauty or The Beauty Way, different translations. But then I said, now I know what it is. How do you do it? And they go, well, we don't know how. We just know it's important, and like that. So up and crash. Yeah. So, but at least I had a name, and I now knew people who recognized what I was talking about. Yeah. So I remember living in my little cabin. I taught off and on. Living in my cabin, and I was walking down the road one day, and I said, it was a gut realization. Nobody knew the answer. Nobody knew how to do this. No one knew how to give this state or any state really to anyone. Yeah, in spite of all the people talking and doing. Yeah, and at that moment it was freeing because I've been searching. Going to person after person. Please teach me. Please show me the answer. Yeah.
So at this point you realize that you have to find it yourself.
Yes. Yeah, and that no one really knew, which was a real surprise, in spite of what everyone was saying. And at that moment, I said, and it freed me because I was an engineer, and my profession was to solve impossible problems. So companies would hire me, and they would say, it's all screwed up, we don't know why, fix it. Yeah, and I'd have to figure out what the problem was, and then a way to solve it. So I said, okay, that's what I do for a living. Why don't I do this for this? Yeah, and that changed everything, because now I wasn't a consumer. Now I was going, okay, now I follow my intuition and see if I can solve this.
And from this point, what was your path?
Good question. There was no answer that I could find, so I had to follow intuition. And my intuition said, whatever this peak state stuff was, and the Beauty Way and the rest, it had something to do with prenatal trauma. And during those years, there were no good trauma therapies available, so you couldn't heal trauma. Yeah, and although people were doing regression work in prenatal stuff, there weren't really good techniques for it. Now, there was a field of prenatal psychology that had already existed, but it wasn't
Leonard Orr at the time,
or Janov, Groff. A lot of people kind of working with it because they could see that it had a real big impact in people's lives, but there weren't good tools. So it was more. Anyway, so
I needed more research.
Exactly. So the first thing I did was I said, okay, if this is my intuition, then I've got to develop a research tool, right? Like I would do as an engineer, build a gadget. And that first research tool was how to regress to prenatal events and heal them. And I was very lucky. I was shown a trick by a man named Ron Mead in California. And he showed me that all trauma has an out-of-body image. So if you think about something that's unpleasant in your past, you see it like TV. Yeah, you see it from the outside. You don't see from your eyes. You see it as if you're watching a TV show. And
because the subconscious mind wants to separate from that.
Oh yeah, because it feels like shit. Yeah, so you want to escape. Yeah. Tak? Am I allowed to say shit on this show? Sorry about that.
Allowed.
Okay. So he showed me that, and he had a technique for dealing with that, reversing that out-of-body viewpoint and going into your experience and feeling it fully. And over time, I took his insights and I turned it into a process we now call wholehearted healing. But that really was designed for two things. One, to heal trauma, because I needed to be able to heal trauma to see what the effects were, and also to allow me to regress to places in utero and earlier sperm and egg trauma. Okay, so that was the first research tool, and that ended up being something we taught to people.
Okay, so what is the marker or when you are sure that all the traumas are healed? What is the point? Yeah?
Okay, so that's pretty much not going to happen.
Never?
Well, it's a complicated answer. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. It turns out and I didn't know this till later, but it turns out there's thousands of traumas, thousands.
Layers of them.
Layers, or just numbers, just sheer numbers, and some are really bad and some are not so bad, and a lot of them are pre-birth. Yeah, so they happen before you're even born, and they affect your life, and you don't even realize it. You know, so we eventually realized that trauma itself was an artifact of a disease process. So it's an infection. But at the time we were doing this, we didn't know that. Yeah. It took another 10 years or something before we figured that out.
And maybe one more thing in this topic, reincarnation. Would you include this in these traumas? Because if you take the issue of the soul, which is separated from the genetics, you have the traumas from previous lives, which are separated from your family, and you have also genetic issues. So how do you relate to that?
That's a great question, because I'm a very practical kind of person, engineer, right? And so I'm in California and I'm hearing about all these different things. And past life is one of them. And I'm going, past life, all bullshit. Yeah. But there's people really interested in it. So I'm thinking, but bullshit, right? And then I was doing a tantra practice with a friend of mine, a dear friend, and all of a sudden, boom, I was in a past life. I was just there. I mean, it was totally real. And I went, holy shit, this stuff exists. Yeah? Engineers, we have to be, convinced. Yeah? But so now I was convinced it existed. And then over time, I did see that therapists who were doing past life regression work were making an impact in some clients. And in other clients, it didn't matter. It wasn't an issue for them. Yeah? It wasn't until years later that we figured out what was really going on with the past life stuff. There is an answer. But that skips forward about 10 years. Maybe at this point I'd like to say, as an engineer, to solve the peak stage problem, I had to understand something. All the traditions and spiritual people that I met, it's like they had two lives. They had the life of their spiritual whatever, or psychological whatever, and then they had the life of, I broke my leg, I need to go to the doctor, I have a sore tooth. And these two worlds were separated. It's like this one had different rules than this one. Yeah. But as an engineer, I'm saying, yes, I can see that they teach them as separate, but there must be some common thing. There must be some way to tie them together. Yeah? And no one had done that. Yeah. Okay, so without being able to tie those together, biology and medicine and psychology to spirituality and healing and all the rest, how could you go forward? Well, what people do generally is they make up techniques and then they sell it as a technique. But that's not how engineers work. I mean, you wouldn't want your engineer to make a car like that or a bridge. It would be a bad idea. So I'm over the years, I'm doing more and more regression work, understanding how prenatal trauma affects people's behavior, all that sort of stuff. And in 2001, I had a breakthrough, huge breakthrough. I had an experience of suddenly being in a place, and I thought, "Whoa, this is a spiritual place," yeah, because it was really weird. And by this point, I have colleagues, and we've started the Institute for the Study of Peak States. We're conferring with each other around the world, and we're sharing. And I figured out how to induce this into other people, and we're going, "What the heck is this?" Yeah. That breakthrough was a breakthrough into realizing that we could see inside the cells. Yeah, but it was so unfamiliar back in 2001 too that we didn't recognize it for 6 to 9 months. And my team were physicians, biologists, and we're all, one day we went, "Holy shit, this isn't spiritual at all. We're seeing inside cells. In fact, we're seeing inside one cell, not all cells." And that breakthrough was huge. That breakthrough allowed us to connect biology, medicine, spirituality, and psychology into one underlying model. it turned out that consciousness is in one cell in the body, just one. And that cell is like the master pattern. Yeah. So you sit here and I sit here, and we're in this room, and we have our legs and arms, and we feel stuff.
Billions of cells.
Tuck. And at the same time, we're in this one cell, and the environment in that one cell is superimposed on our experience, like it's a video game. So the two things are overlaid. Yeah. And it turned out that people's suffering, most of that people's suffering is due to problems inside that one cell. Okay, this is huge. And then we started to realize that people's spiritual experiences were also based on what was happening inside that cell. Yeah? But it was in a direction no one had ever looked. Yeah? And in fact, they couldn't look until 20 years ago because until the advent of electron microscopes and many, many years of work by a lot of scientists who were looking inside the cell to analyze it, the problem was insoluble. You couldn't realize what was going on because science hadn't caught up. So I was born in just the right time. Whew. Yeah? If I'd born 20 or 30 years earlier, I never would have solved it.
What was the method of inducing this state?
Well, in my case, I just kept healing stuff and doing different, facing pains and stuff until one day it just opened for me.
Yeah, samadhi.
No, actually, I was in a Native American sweat ceremony at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just spontaneously went into it. We don't actually describe the method to people because what we found is people can have poor experiences because of stuff that we didn't understand for many years. Yeah, one of the poor experiences is that they have a tendency to screw it up. So now that they're in the cell, they're like little kids with a new toy. Yeah. Oh, if I do this, if I do that, and then they hurt themselves. Yeah. The other problem was something that we didn't realize for many years, and it turned out that there are diseases that live inside that cell. Okay, it's a big cell, and
where is it?
In the head.
In the head.
Yeah. And so these diseases, we experience them in our lives as causing symptoms or not causing symptoms. But it's like we're a big tree in the jungle, and we've got all these little things living on us. Yeah? When you can go inside the primary cell, you can accidentally trigger these organisms, and then they react, and then you have symptoms, and stuff can happen. So at this present time, we don't teach how to do that, but about a third of the population is doing it spontaneously. Yeah.
What about pineal gland? Is it inside?
No, this primary cell is not a gland. In fact, you actually had a name for it that's quite accurate, or maybe it was your colleague.
Omnipotent cell.
Yeah, you could think of it as an omnipotent stem cell. It's like the original stem cell just after conception. It's made, yeah.
Okay, so let's go. We'll cover this topic of the primal cell or omnipotent cell later on. But first, let's go to the psychological past lives. Not covered.
We'll finish that up because now I can answer the question.
Yeah.
Okay. Once you realize you're working with the cell, then you can go, what are past lives? Yeah, because we realize that all of these spiritual experiences were based on biology, but biology in the cell, where no one was looking. Okay? Well, the past life thing turned out to be experiences due to a fungal infection on the interior of that particular cell membrane, okay, on the inside. So that organism looked like a webbing, and it had nodes, and those nodes were experienced as past lives. Yeah, no kidding. So it turned out that a past life traumas and stuff were when this organism was damaged and you were starting to experience stuff from it. A healthy organism, you didn't feel any past lives. It was just happily doing its own thing, it was just living there. So that was quite a surprise, because if you've had a past life experience, you know that's you, and you can recognize other people in the past life. But it turned out it's an artifact of this disease, this fungal disease inside the cell. which was a real shock to all of us. Yeah.
So, the clear answer, does it reincarnation exist or not?
Well, not that mechanism for sure. That mechanism is a disease artifact, and if you get rid of the disease, you just don't have that experience anymore. No more past lives.
Okay. So, psychological issues like depression and other stuff, what is it?
A lot of different causes. And it boils down to different problems in that primary cell. Depression is a funny word because although we say it as a word, I don't know what it is in Polish, but...
Depresja.
Yeah, if you look at it, it turns out there's like 6 or 7 different things, completely unrelated things that are called that. So when you want to help someone with depression, you have to figure out what particular thing they have that they're calling depression. Yeah, they feel like shit, but you have to figure out what particular way they're feeling like shit. Once you do that, then you can actually fix those problems because you find out what the particular thing that you're calling depression is, then you, which we've figured out, then you go and use the solution for that particular problem. It all boils down to stuff either based directly on trauma or stuff that's based on problems inside the cell.
Yeah. So there are 6 kinds of depression.
Yeah, about 6, maybe 7.
Okay. Schizophrenia.
That's a different topic. So schizophrenia has a whole list of criteria, but for this discussion, let's just talk about schizophrenic voices, because that's something that's really close to my heart. Yeah,
you had that?
No, but my dad did.
Okay.
He was a physician, and he had acquired late-onset schizophrenia when he was around 35. So he suddenly went from being an amazing guy to a really a guy who just suddenly got sicker and sicker. Yeah, and came in waves until finally he just was in a facility and couldn't get well. And it was terrible, And yeah, it was really tough for our family around his illness.
How to heal that?
Good question. It turned out that I was following my intuition about prenatal trauma. And one day I thought to myself, everybody in the spiritual traditions keeps saying, okay, let's get a quiet mind. It's going to be good for you, right? Quiet mind, quiet your mind, meditate, all that. I thought, what are they doing? Well, maybe if I can figure out a way to quiet the mind, it'll move the peak states investigation forward. And what I found was fascinating. That chatter in the mind turned out to correspond to traumatic moments in utero. So you could have a thought, like just you, a normal person, would have be thinking in their head. Yeah. And often those thoughts wouldn't even be their thoughts. They would be, you could think of it as someone else's thoughts.
Like mothers.
Or another person. A normal person is like living in a bar,
Okay.
Bar, not a restaurant, but a bar where you drink alcohol. And you've got all these people chattering, and we just think it's normal. Because it turned out that this schizophrenic voices, the kind that my dad had, and which most people have, but at a subclinical level, was due to a fungal infection. That was a huge discovery, and we made that in about 2009. But before we'd made that discovery, we'd figured out how to eliminate individual mind chatter, one at a time. Boom, 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 boom. Now we generally just go to make people immune to the fungus, and then all the chatter is gone all at once. Back to my dad, in about 1995, 96, I came up with a way to eliminate the voices individually. And then I did it to my dad, who was in terrible shape. He was catatonic and all the rest. And I eliminated just 3 voices. Boom, he was back to normal. I suddenly had my dad back. And
how did you do that?
Well, I used trauma healing on prenatal trauma. Yeah,
so
and it
layers
was
of traumas.
Well, just three traumas.
Yeah,
just three.
Okay.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, and then about a half an hour later, my dad woke up, and I asked Dad what it was like being catatonic, and he said I was trapped in a nightmare that never stopped for all those years.
So everything is mushrooms.
No, there's lots of other things, bacteria, viruses. It just turned out that the fungus was a real problem in those two categories.
Okay, so what kind of spray did you use for the fungus?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you go, like I said, my dad was a physician, my mom was a nurse, and she ran a big hospital. I mean, I come from a medical background, but what we did instead is we said, okay, now that we understand there's a cell, and there's development that's very early traumas that cause problems in the cell, maybe, just maybe, we can do kinds of healings that will make people immune to different infections. Yeah, and that turned out to work, although it didn't work very well for a lot of years. We struggled to really solve that problem of how to make people immune to different pathogens. So it was 2011 or 2012, which was our first way to make people immune to that pathogen, the fungus that causes the chatter in the head.
How?
What we did in that technique was we went back into the past very early, right when the sperm and the egg are being made. It's called, in English, it's called primordial germ cells. And there's a moment where if you go to that moment in time, and there's tricks to do it, if you go to that moment in time and you heal all of the feelings you have, either with tapping or regression or any trauma healing technique, EMDR, it doesn't matter. If you heal that moment's trauma, the fungus is gone out of the present. But it's very interesting because half it's gone. First you do the sperm, boom, your right side's quiet. Then you do the egg, boom, your left side's quiet because you're infected from your father and your mother. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
took a lot of years to figure that out. Yeah.
So millions of dollars worth discoveries. Kind of. Because you delete all the medicine, which is not necessary now.
Well, I'm a fan of medicine because pills are easy. Yeah. But when we were trying to do these problems, we didn't have any money. Well, little money. Medicine is expensive. Yeah. So we had to come up with solutions that we could do from our heads that were cheap. Yeah, and it turned out that approaching these problems psychologically, solving how to apply psychological techniques to healing issues in the cell, allowed us to move forward. Yeah.
Okay, so let's take the issue of the topic of karma. Some people have easy life, some have difficult life. Is it also bacteria, viruses, fungus, or something else?
Well, that's a hard question to answer.
Yeah. But you solve hard problems, so please answer.
Well, I can, but the answer is not a soundbite. Okay, so if you think about it a second, if you take people who are in beauty way, their lives are fundamentally better. Okay, so there's a group. So if you look at normal people, they're suffering, yeah, like a Gaussian curve. And then you get this little spike of people in beauty way that are completely different. Okay, so to answer your question, you have to look at these two different groups differently. Yeah. Okay, so what we'd like to do is take this large mass of people and move them up to this little spike of groups. Yeah, that would be best. If you're not doing that, then you look at the Gaussian distribution of normal consciousness. Yeah, and you say, well, what makes the difference between this end of it, where they're all really sick, and this end where they're doing pretty well? Yeah, they're still normal consciousness, but they're better than this end. You know what I'm saying? Let's again ignore the beauty way people. So it turned out that it varies in a lot of different ways, and a lot of it, the primary mechanism is epigenetic. So what that means is that they inherit problems in the cell that correspond, that indirectly cause them to have not as good life as another person might have. So epigenetics means that somewhere in your ancestry there was a trauma, which we call a generational trauma. Something bad happened, and it carries forward into the present, and it makes you feel fundamentally flawed in yourself, and it affects your behavior. It also, and this is key, it also affects how the cell is made. So it's like these epigenetic damage screw up your houseplants. It leaves holes in the roof and the corner of the wall missing and stuff like that. So if you had a house and you randomly destroyed pieces of it, some people would be lucky and the roof would be solid, maybe the walls would be gone. Yeah, and others people had big holes in the roof and the snow would get in and the rain would get in. So how that epigenetic damage plays out in the cells really matters on how you are in the present. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This primal cell has obviously some kind of immunity system. Why does it not kill the fungus?
That's a great question. And that baffled us for a long time. Yeah? The dominant model in the world right now is that we're a victim.
Yeah.
That we have to defend ourselves from these diseases. Yeah. And that if circumstances are such, then we get the disease and we get sick. Yeah? But if you think about it a minute, that can't be true. Because you take 100 people and you expose them to the same pathogen, and some are really sick, and some are a little sick, and some are completely fine. So, what's going on? Well, you argue they have a better immune system, they have a crappy immune system. But that doesn't really answer anything. It just says you're describing the phenomenon, but you don't really know what's happening inside the person. Yeah. What we discovered finally is that people get sick because the diseases are a substitute for stuff that's not right in the cell. So instead of keeping the diseases out, the person wants the disease. That at a deep level, the disease is there to fix a different problem. The problem is the disease has its own agenda. It's an organism and it wants to do stuff too. So like eat you. Or live off of your stuff inside your cells. So you bring it in because it's going to make you feel better, and then it makes you feel worse because it has its own thing going on, right? And so that was figuring out that underlying mechanism was huge, and that's why we can now target different diseases and make people immune to them, because we can go to the underlying reason they want the disease in the first place.
How would you fit searching for God in this?
In all this.
Everything, yeah.
Again, we're a research institute, and in terms of engineering, it means it's not a mature technology. Okay? So we're on the rise. Each year we know more. Yeah. But the God issue is really important because are we alone? Is there more? And as an engineer, I'm thinking, we live, we die. Got a little iffy around the peaks about the past lives, but then I found out it was a disease, and on I went. But our work has shown that there's more to our lives than just ourselves. Okay. Unfortunately, a lot of this is disease issues, right? But if you get past the disease issues, it turns out that all life on Earth is connected. Yeah. As the Native Americans say, the Gaia consciousness, Gaia exists. What's even more amazing to me is that Gaia really wants each of us to be well. It's like a giant supercomputer that cares about you, cares about me, cares about you. And then the question becomes, if that's the case, how come the world is so screwed up? Yeah. Why do people get diseases? And it was really solving that mystery that took 20, 30 years. If Gaia exists, if this is true, then how come the world is in the situation that it is? And it took us a long time, and we don't even have a fix for what we found. But what we discovered is there's a kind of disease process in people that blocks awareness of Gaia.
Ah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Have you actually answered the question why the primary cell does not kill the parasites?
Indirectly. I said that the primary cell has damage in itself, and it brings the parasites in on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's not about to get rid of them, if it can avoid that, or it'll reduce them. Yeah. Do you understand? So the question really isn't why isn't the primary cell getting rid of it. The question is what's damaged in the primary cell that makes the cell want to hang on to the disease.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So it's a different problem.
Mm-hmm.
And once you realize that, you fix this other problem, and the disease goes away.
Yeah.
Yeah. In our first generation techniques, we went to the moment where people were getting infected, and then we tried to heal it there. And sometimes that would work, and sometimes it wouldn't. And we couldn't figure this out, right? We'd heal all the trauma, and yet some people just wouldn't be able to heal that moment fully. Well, it turned out this other thing, their damage in a more deep, more fundamental way, was activated, and they weren't about to let go of their disease because it was fixing something else, or at least they felt it was fixing something else. It really wasn't, but it felt that way to the organism. So
okay, so how to go there?
Well, that's more than a sound bite, and
so two bites.
Yeah, 2 bites. Okay. To answer this, I'm going to have to back off a bit. The work we're doing is really fundamental. It means that because it's experimental, we have to test things really thoroughly to make sure it's safe.
Yeah.
The reason is because we're messing with the interior of a cell. Yeah? And if we mess in the wrong way, or there's something complex about that particular person that we weren't anticipating, we can make things worse.
Yes.
Yeah. So in our work, we do a lot of safety testing. It's years before we release something to clinics for people to use. We want to really make sure that because it's a new science, a new understanding, that there wasn't something we missed. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to quite answer your question. All I'm going to say is that this immunity stuff is still in the isn't released to the public. It's released to therapists that work with us who are treating clients, but it's still, we're really supervising it closely to make sure that there's no unexpected problems. Does that make sense? So I'm not really going to say, okay, do this and this and this. However, I will give one example. I finished a book last year called Silence the Voices, and it's about the schizophrenic voices, yeah? And I described the biology in that book of exactly what we did to make people immune to the fungus. So you kind of got to read the book. It's 200 pages long to be able to really understand what we did and how we did it. But it really involves very early developmental events and how it affects the cell. And that's real biology. It's not soundbite stuff. It's like going up to a biologist and say, okay, how does the cell work? And he goes, okay, what part of the cell do you want to know about? It's real science.
So maybe partial answer would be that the cell treats the fungus and viruses as part of itself, so it's not antagonistic. It's part of me, so I don't remove it.
Sometimes that's true, and sometimes it feels like it's not part of me, but it wants it because it makes them this other problem feel better.
Okay. In relationships, there are sometimes situations that one person can touch you deeply, and the other one can do the same, but does not touch you. Nothing happens. Why? Just mushrooms talking to each other?
Actually, that's a big part of it. That chatter in the mind disease actually is the basis of what people call cords in the so-called psychological or spiritual community. But there's just a ton of reasons. People are very complex. There's a lot of reasons why they come together. There's a lot of reasons why they break up. We did find that there is, kind of by accident, we did find that there is one state of consciousness that makes people's relationships amazing. Yeah, but again, it's uncommon. Yeah? But it is so cool. And it's in this experience or the state, the couple feel that their partner is right next to them or even partially inside them all the time. And it makes it causes you to be just fascinated by your partner. Like they're the most interesting thing in the world. They're like your best friend. You just can't get enough of who
Resonates.
they are. And even deeper than that. And it changes you if you're with a partner like that, because it's like you have somewhere to stand. You can live your life in a really deeply grounded way as long as you're feeling connected to that partner in this particular manner. I don't see it very often, but it does exist. Some people have it, but not many. Most of us struggle with normal kind of connections. These extraordinary kind of connections are not common.
Okay, and why?
Why aren't they common?
Why? What happens inside this cell if something like this happens? It's like resonance of all the parasites in us if this happens.
You mean the good one or the bad one?
The good one is good resonance, and the bad one is bad resonance, I think.
Well, it's more like the bad one is a lack, and then you make up for it in however ways that you try and make up for it in your relationship. The good one is where the cell is working in a certain area more optimally. Okay? So think about conception. You got an egg and a little sperm, yeah? And if they come together in a really good way, it's kind of like a man and a woman coming together, the egg being female and the sperm feeling male. That really good way then translates into the relationship, a really optimum relationship with someone else. If this goes wrong, which it does for most people, then there's struggle. There's the feeling I'm going to die, there's feelings that I don't like you, just stuff like that. So this really, really early stuff gets played out in our lives as adults. This one state I was just talking about, and there's others that also affect relationships, but I like this one because it's just so cool. A person who has it feels their partner as connected or in their presence is with them all the time. But if you look inside the cell, it's actually quite dramatic. Inside the cell, it's like there's this fire going on inside. And that fire in that one person's cell is matching a fire inside this other person's cell. It's like, like flames.
So that's why we have twin flames.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. I mean, I heard that expression before and I rolled my eyes, engineer, right? I was pretty surprised when that actually turned out to be the case. And the characteristics are quite defined. By the way, we have a list of all these different states on our website, and we just give characteristics so you can identify, and we give them names.
Okay, post-traumatic stress disorder, or let's say a soldier is at war and stressed a lot. What happens with the parasites in the cell?
It's not a parasite issue directly.
No?
But it's fascinating. I wish I had a blackboard, professor, right?
Yeah.
I'm used to that. In psychology, people imagine that trauma is stored in the brain. Yeah? Makes sense, right? Brain, trauma.
Okay. Maybe for some people, because for me it's like in the body, everywhere.
That's true. You experience it as a real visceral experience. True. But it turns out trauma is actually stored in that primary cell I was telling you about in a very interesting way. When you need a protein to do something, like raise your arm or act in some way, the cell is this little machine that makes these proteins so can do stuff. To make a protein, it has to bring a gene out of the nucleolus, make a copy with what's called messenger RNA, stick it out into the cytoplasm. A ribosome reads this string and boom, makes a protein. That's how, if everything's working right. Okay? What happens with trauma is that in that trauma moment, your cell says, I need to do something. Yeah, I need some proteins. And that gene comes out to the edge to be copied. An mRNA string is fabricated, a copy of the gene, but it can't free itself from the DNA string. Okay? So it goes out of the nucleus, and it's kind of like floating around in the cytoplasm like a bit of seaweed floating on the seafloor, where the seafloor is the nuclear membrane. And so one end is out in the cytoplasm, the other end stuck to the gene. Yeah, and that's because of what's called epigenetic damage. That gene doesn't have a problem. The coding on the gene is the problem. And that coding is damaged and it won't let this copy free. Okay, with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay. So, little ribosome, which looks like a crumpled bag. Ribosome comes to the end of the string and says, I can make a protein. And it starts reading down the string. It's making the protein, yeah? And then bangs into the nuclear membrane. Can't go any further. I can't get to the end. And it's stuck. We experience that as trauma. So if you take your consciousness and put it into this ribosome, it's like an out-of-body experience, an out-of-body image, which I was just talking about is the nature of trauma. So that's where trauma comes from. It's actually in the ribosome. And then time goes on, and then you need that protein again. So ribosome comes along and says, we need that protein, down the string, and then bangs into the ribosome that's there. And what you end up is a long string with a bunch of these ribosomes on it, each one corresponding to a trauma moment. You with me so far?
Yes.
So trauma is biological. And what's really fascinating in the last year, some really wonderful experiments were done in the US that showed that trauma is carried in the RNA. They experimented with some sea slugs. It's not in neurons at all. So they were able to inject RNA into other sea slugs and demonstrate that the traumas that the first set had are now carried into the second set. Huge breakthrough. And it's exactly what I'm describing here. This is an RNA problem, not something in the brain. Okay, so now we got the string, all the traumas on it. They are connected by a theme of feeling. Yeah? They all feel bad in your life. Yeah? And you can heal it in one of many ways at this point. Okay? You can go to the first time you had that experience and suffer, and then once you suffer enough, it'll heal. This whole string will release, and they're all gone.
Go deeply and allow it to happen.
Correct. Do the in-body experience, reverse it. You can use a tapping therapy. Yeah? And that's
EFT.
EFT is one of them. It turns out we use a simpler variation. The tapping therapy fixes that little protein coating that's screwed up, and as you do the tapping, it gets better and better and better until finally it releases the string, and poof, the trauma goes away. So that's another way to do it. There's many different ways. Different people have exploited different phenomena in the cell, but they all zero in on releasing that string. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, super.
So that's trauma. So from our perspective, it isn't a question of how severe the trauma is, although the client would say, I'm a war victim, or my mom yelled at me, as being very different. But biologically, they're the same mechanism. They're stuck string inside the nucleus and in the cytoplasm.
Yeah. Okay, cancer.
We don't work on that. No.
It's caused also by kind of stress.
We've got too many things on our plate right now. Yeah.
So
it's a new technology, and as other people start to explore this technology, there's so many things that it can be applied with. Our focus is diseases that can really move our understanding forward. Yeah. So.
Okay, physical brain damage. I saw a picture of a man who was crushed by a tree and like part of the brain was removed and he still could live. So why the brain is not important? Let's say.
That's a great question. In fact, to the people who are listening, okay? If you line up 10 people and you take a brick and you calibrate a whack on the head on each one in the same place, yeah? You know, one will drop dead, a whole bunch will be injured, and some won't be injured, but they'll punch you in the head. They'll punch you because they didn't like being hit by a brick. How people respond to trauma wildly varies from person to person, physical trauma to brain trauma. And what we found is that the reason there's such a variation is because at the very beginning of the creation of the egg and the sperm, the system that corresponds to the brain is forming. Okay, you could say it's like the seed pattern. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And unfortunately, for most people, that seed pattern is kind of buggered. It's kind of messed up.
It multiplies.
It gets worse and worse, yeah. It's like that initial defect makes you more and more damaged later on. Yeah. And how bad that seed damage is and where that seed damage is really matters as far as the person goes. So when we do traumatic brain injury, which, by the way, is a product that we've had for many years, we repair that initial seed, and then the brain repairs itself, and the symptoms of traumatic brain injury go away.
Okay,
yeah.
So since this first cell is so important, why do we need brain? What's it for?
Well, my brain's kind of important to me.
Okay.
In a really serious way, that's a very insightful question. Think about evolution. Okay, billions of years ago, there's eukaryotic cells floating around, just single cells, right? And they've got nucleuses and other stuff in them. Okay, as years went on, they started to learn how to live in colonies. Yeah, and then eventually they started to learn how to make duplicates of themselves, which we now experience as a multicelled organism. Okay? So they start with that single cell, and that's really the primary cell in our heads. All these other cells are just like in evolution, they are subcells made from this primary cell, but it's like wearing a coat as far as this one cell is concerned. That's a huge difference in understanding biology. Our conventional understanding is we're made up of all these millions of cells, which is what gives us our complexity. It isn't that way at all. That single cell is where our consciousness is, and all these other cells are like a garment that allows us to live in a different environment and do more stuff. So if you use a computer analogy, all these other cells are like an extra hard drive, another video monitor, another keyboard, some more memories, like that. That primary cell is where the microprocessor is, it's where the intelligence is. Yeah, it's where awareness is, consciousness itself. And all the other cells just add ability. Yeah. So our brain's really useful because it allows us to do stuff that the single cell just can't do by itself, right? But it's not, but it's like extra.
Okay.
Yeah. So a little cat has a brain. It's like buying, a smaller keyboard. And then a guy has a big brain, and it's like buying a really giant keyboard, or a memory unit or something.
What about organisms which have many bodies, like ants? They work like one organism and one central cell in the mother. Yeah,
the queen. I can't really answer that. I'm afraid that there's only so many hours in a day. We focus on people primarily.
Okay, so the other two words, mind and soul, how would you relate them, and where would you insert them?
That's a very good question, because again, when I talk about people who do spiritual practices, there's separate worlds, right? Body, soul, mind, soul, like they're different worlds. But it turns out, and again, it depends on how you define the word, because a lot of these words don't have a really good definition. Yeah, let's define it. I'll show you a kinesthetic way to your audience. Okay, because if you can't define things, what's it mean? The word has no meaning.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you take your finger, why don't you do this for me?
Yeah.
Take your finger and point above your head, like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Are you below your finger or are you above it? in your awareness? Is your awareness below your finger or above your finger?
I am together with the finger. We are one.
Okay. As you bring, I'll do this for the audience. As you bring your finger down, eventually it'll feel like your finger is pointing at you. And then as you continue the finger down, the finger is below you. Yeah?
Okay.
Now, in your case, it may be that your finger, you are everywhere from here to here, but that's not normal for people. Normal people, they point at themselves somewhere in the body and say, this is where I am. This is where I live.
Okay.
Yeah, the body is like a garment, but I am here. Mm-hmm. Do you understand? We call that center of awareness. Yeah, and it varies from person to person, and that it can move also. But people have a location. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So some people may be in the head, some people may be in the chest, some people may be in the belly, and interestingly enough, some people have two, more than one. They're here and here, simultaneously. Okay. It turns out that awareness is actually a biological substance in the very center of that primary cell. It can be actually observed if you have that ability. Okay, and if it's buggered, which it can be, then you have weird problems that are based on awareness being damaged, and that a lot of our research time is spent on what's wrong with that and how do we fix it. Yeah. Yeah. So, what's the meaning of soul? It's a little hard to say, yeah, but if you define soul as awareness, at kinesthetic awareness that we're pointing at, then we could say, chunks of that are missing. It feels like what's called soul loss in shamanic traditions, but essentially it boils down to a biological basis in the cell itself. Yeah, does that help?
Yeah, and mind, like quiet mind, and the chatter. I heard one of the definitions that mind is the flow of thoughts. Mind is not something static, it's process of the flow of thoughts. When you stop it, you have no mind. Nama in Sanskrit. So mind is something artificial, made for this body only, or something which can stick to the soul.
Okay. So this is exactly the kind of question that drives me crazy. Yeah? Oh. Because you're coming from a tradition where it has certain models.
Yes.
Yeah. But when you understand the underlying biology, you realize there's flaws in the question. It's like if I asked you, when did you stop beating your husband?
Exactly.
Do you have a husband? Well, you're a guy. You don't have a husband. But I keep saying, tell me, when did you stop beating your husband? You know, the question itself is flawed because the underlying assumptions are wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
So these traditions give you a model, and then you ask questions based on the model. But if you understand the biology, you realize that the question itself has no answer. So let's just go back to the voices. You get rid of that fungus, your mind is completely silent. It's dead quiet. There's no thoughts in your mind all the time. Whether you're meditating, whether you're going to the toilet, quiet all the time. And that's not what these traditions would say, because they're not used to working at this level of saying, oh my God, the chatter in the head is due to a fungal disease. Let's get rid of the fungal disease. They don't even, 2,000 years ago, there was no concept of disease. Yeah, it's a recent phenomenon in the last 100 years, basically. So we can answer and understand things now based on biology that could never be even conceptualized until recently. Yeah. So what you see when you ask questions like that is these old traditions coming up to the present with their particular models colliding with a biological understanding, and the biology allows you to see it in a much bigger way. Yeah. Again, I started this talk by saying we're not about a technique, we're about understanding the underlying biology and generating techniques to solve the problems that we see. Yeah.
Now let's go back to the peak states. So the inner peace is the effect of removing all the parasites. Can you?
No.
No.
You mean the inner peace state?
Yeah, from what you said before.
Okay,
this is my kind of conclusion that.
Yeah. You're a smart guy. You think, okay, if you've got diseases, let's get rid of the underlying problems, get rid of all diseases, person would be amazing. And we agree. Unfortunately, we don't have a technology that allows that yet. We understand the nature of the problem, we understand why people have these things, we haven't figured out a solution yet. So that's sometime in the future, which most of our research time is spent on that particular problem. Because it would solve everything. You make people immune to everything, they'll have all these peak states and none of the problems that we associate with normal people. When I started with Beauty Way, it's fundamentally better, but it's nowhere near as good as the potential of completely getting rid of all these problems in the primary cell. I didn't know that, right? I started with that. But now I can see that if we solve this problem, we can make people fundamentally different in a greater way that almost can't be imagined. Yeah.
Okay, so please define peak state, peak experience, and what are they?
Good question. As we had a little talk before this started when we were talking about this. When I started this work, I was thinking in terms of Beauty Way. So I thought, okay, I'm going to figure out ways to get particular peak states. And I figured out a bunch, there's at least 100 of different states. Okay, so we went back to development and we found where in development, if you heal it, you get a peak state. Okay, kind of straightforward. Early development, fix that, peak state in the present. Okay, that was our original model. And I'm all excited, I'm like a little puppy. I'm just got my tail wagging and I'm saying, okay, come, we'll do this, give you this peak state, here's a list, go like that. What happened was really interesting. Most people weren't happy with the states that they got, even though they were genuine, positive peak states. Yeah. So I'm going, what? How can you not be excited by this? This is really amazing, And they're going, nah, right? This isn't what I wanted. And I'm thinking, what? Well, there was two reasons. Yeah. One reason is because the person is damaged inside, and they're hoping that a peak state will fix them as if it were an aspirin.
Yeah.
So self-medicating. Like some people use alcohol.
Shortcut.
Exactly. So rather than fix the underlying problem, they think they can get a peak state that will cover it or hide it or make it go away or something like that. Yeah. And in fact, there are some states that will make stuff go away, but not just a couple of them. All right. So that was one of the problems. But the other problem was more fundamental. So we take someone who's really healthy, they're not trying to hide anything, they get this peak state and they're still going, meh, and I'm going, what's going on? Well, Alexander Nadeau in Quebec finally pointed this out to me. He said, they're not interested in something off a list like a menu. They've had a peak experience in their lives. A moment when that was just amazing. They remember that. They go, wow, that was cool. I want that again. That's what they want. They don't want something off a list because it isn't going to match that momentary peak experience. What they want is that peak experience all the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, it was about 2007 or 2008, and we spent a lot of time working on that until about 2011 when we finally figured out how to do that routinely. So therapists who are licensed by that can, for the most part, take your peak experience and turn it into a continuous peak state. Yeah, there's a couple of exceptions, but in general, that's what happens. Again, we have to make sure that it isn't trying to conceal something that's painful. But if a person is in a good space, we can turn that momentary peak experience into a permanent, lasting peak state. And that took about 4 or 5 years before we had a good way to do that.
Why do some people take drugs? What do they want to substitute for?
Well, it depends on the drugs you're talking about. Are you talking about addictive drugs or hallucinogenic drugs or pain drugs?
Just example, just whatever you know about it.
Addictions is a whole area, and we spent 10 years working on addictions. Yeah, it turned out that the craving for the different substances, there's an underlying biology for that. And we came up with a simple way to address that. We can get rid of the craving and withdrawal symptoms quite quickly. So behavior, though, is more complex than cravings. once that's gone, some people may continue to use even though they don't crave anymore. Okay, mm-hmm. So that's one area of this question. Other people may have a peak experience or feel special with whatever substance they're using, they might be getting a momentary peak experience and then they're trying to get it back again. Mm-hmm. So perhaps they use drugs, or perhaps they go mountain climbing, or they go running in a marathon, or they work with clients. They have a momentary rush mm-hmm. that's temporary from the setting that they're in, whether it's drugs or some activity. Yeah. So we call that a peak experience. It turns out it's better to make that a permanent peak state by healing trauma than it is to try and carry a mountain in your backyard because at the top of the mountain you felt really great, or lug your clients around with you because when you work with clients you feel really great, like that. So that's kind of a second area. So the first was the cravings, addictive behavior. The second was it generates a peak experience. And there's a third, which escapes me at the moment.
Okay, some drugs,
mm-hmm.
Let's say, make people feel blissful.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of peak experience,
that
1 of 100 or something
mm-hmm.
like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe because people in their normal life don't feel happy,
mm-hmm.
they want to feel happy with this
mm-hmm.
tool, like
mm-hmm.
pill, drug,
mm-hmm.
whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be happy.
Right, they want to feel better.
Yeah.
So the question is, are they getting rid of pain, or are they trying to go to something positive?
Uh-huh.
They're kind of different. Yeah. Are you suffering and you want to feel like you're taking aspirin, or are you wanting something that makes you better than you are now? For example, maybe you have a intuition that the beauty way exists. You've never had it, or maybe you just felt it once, and you want to have that because you've had a momentary glimpse of it. And so you try all kinds of different things to try and get it again. They're sort of different problems.
Okay, next thing, someone told me that chakras
mm-hmm.
in the body are like fungus.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously they are also in the primal cell.
Correct. In fact, let's add to that.
Yeah.
People who watch have heard about Chinese medicine.
Yeah.
And the meridians. But when you dissect people, you don't find the meridians, right?
Yeah.
So where are they? And yet they do stuff with the acupuncture that actually works. So somehow there is something going on, but biologists would say it's not there, right?
Some say that it is related to the nerves.
Yeah. And people say that because that's the only thing they have to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you have a sandbox, everything is sand. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It turns out that those meridians actually exist inside the primary cell. Yeah. They exist. What was a surprise to us is the meridians aren't something that's supposed to be there. But it's so common, medicine that works with meridians is actually quite applicable.
Okay, so what would happen if we get rid of that?
It turns out the meridians and the chakras are aspects of a disease process in the cell.
Uh-huh.
Okay? And as you said, this one turns out also to be a fungus. It just happens to be an accident. We're just hitting funguses today. I'm not sure why. It's a fungus that lives on the nucleus. Yeah? And this feeling of having chakras, whether it's one or many, you can actually see it on the nucleus if you have this ability to see inside the cell as an organism that's living along the perimeter of the nucleus where the two halves join.
Okay, so again, what would happen if we get rid of the chakras?
Well, we were pretty interested in that, right? So what does happen? So we ran an experiment in 2012, and this is not something that we do with clients. This is a research level experiment. But we figured out a way to get rid of that organism. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And we had a Chinese medicine doctor and an acupuncturist working with us as an observer to measure the client that we were testing. two things happened. Well, a couple of things happened. All the meridians disappeared. Chakras disappeared. The pulses went away. So those Chinese guys feel the pulses, right? Mm-hmm. And they can feel stuff from the pulses. Boom, gone. Okay, we're going, wow, didn't expect that. The other thing that was really fascinating is that now, instead of having to tap or do some other trauma technique, just feeling the feeling would dissolve it. Mm-hmm. So without that organism there, all the tricks you have to do to heal stuff and let it go just went away. You just feel stuff, boom, it goes away.
Okay.
So that's kind of the result of that experiment.
So it is useful to get rid of chakras.
I'd agree.
Super. So how to do that?
Well,
permanently.
We did that experiment on a one-person basis, yeah? Uh-huh. And we said after that, we need to understand the biology better before we try this again. And so we put that aside, how many years? 6 years ago, as we understand more how this all works.
But some people sell this service of removing chakras. That's what I heard.
Well, that brings up a good question. Yeah. If you've been in this field for a while, you start to realize there's just a lot of garbage out there. Uh-huh. Yeah. And I'm actually embarrassed to be in this field because of that. I would like to be just an engineer doing engineering stuff, right? Uh-huh. And not have people look at me like I'm flaky. Okay? So how do you deal with this question? Because people are selling everything. Mm-hmm. Because people want stuff, so they'll sell you. It's like in any industry, You want a car, those guys who'll sell you this thing that's... what's a terrible car?
In English, it's lemon.
Okay, a lemon. Okay, so they'll sell you lemons, they'll sell you Toyotas. There's a huge range, right? So in my work, I said, okay, how do we address this problem? Because we're pushing the edges of science. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The way we did it was we said, okay, in anything we do, if we're charging money, then we have to have it as a pay for results only. Mm-hmm. So we have to have results you can measure, and the client agrees to ahead of time that they want these results. Yeah. And if they don't get the results, it's free. Okay?
Yeah.
That huge, because now suddenly we can back up what we're saying. Because we test stuff. We can also find out if it didn't work, because people come back and say, I want my money back. Yeah? Mm-hmm. What we find in this field is nobody's doing that, because the stuff they do doesn't really work to a large extent. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It sort of depends. There's a lot of variables. This charge for results was huge. A huge way of addressing this issue of, is it real or is it fake? Yeah? And also to give us feedback. Because it's research. We're developing something never been seen before. We need that feedback to find out if it's stable, do they get the problem back, and that money incentive really helped me as a head of the research. Does that help?
Yeah, super.
Yeah. So to answer your question, I have no idea what they're doing, but whatever they're doing, they should be writing down what it is they're offering. Because a client can't say, oh, my chakras are gone or not. Who knows that? What they should be doing is some observable criteria in their body or in their environment that they can measure. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Since the chakras are kind of fungus, when we rewind the tape, what is the moment it appears in the cell for the first time? Yeah,
it's very interesting. It happens way early in the primordial germ cells.
You mean in the grandmother?
No. The parent is infected, and they pass that infection to the next generation at the very origin of the egg and the sperm. That's why it's so common. It's just everywhere. Everybody's got it, pretty much.
Are there any kind of energetical parasites in the cell, like not material?
No. In our work, we found everything boils down to biology. Everything. You experience stuff as, quote, energetic, but if you look, it always has a biological basis. Like, you may say, okay, there's radio waves. Yeah? They're not material. You can't sense them, you can't taste them. But you have a phone, and it can interact with those immaterial things and give you some sort of result. all these...
And through the electromagnetic waves, we can induce some virus in the phone also.
Well, we can do a lot of things, but the bottom line is the phenomenon that we think of as energetic actually always has a biological basis. And often to fix it, you have to fix the biology. You can't fix it at the so-called energetic level. And that was a huge discovery for us. We actually have a name for it in our book, one of our books. We call it the transpersonal biology model. So I don't care what energetic thing you're talking about, it always comes back to something in the cell. I know it's hard to believe.
Analogy, out of the body experience.
Mm-hmm.
If someone goes somewhere else, out of the body,
it has a biological basis.
Experiences stuff, goes back, and you have the information which you couldn't have with your biology.
Right. But how many people do that? Not very many, right? So the phenomenon does exist, I can say that for sure. But it has a biological basis. Yeah. And let me give you an example. How about trauma? You're out of body in trauma. You think about something unpleasant, boom, you're outside. In your memory. Yeah. And you're really outside. If you look at some of these traumas, people are seeing stuff that they didn't see from their eyes, in their memories, in these out-of-body experiences. And you're saying, well, that's energetic. You're outside of it. There's no little camera floating around out there. Yeah. It turns out that there is a biological substrate to that experience, and it turns out to be remember those ribosomes I was talking about that act as gateways into these moments? Yeah. It turns out if you look inside the ribosome, there's this little crystalline material, and that acts as the portal to this out-of-body experience. Without the crystal stuff, no out-of-body experience.
So it's like different dimensions.
I would think of it more in terms of material that has certain properties. Like water has a property, steel has another property. This crystal has a property that we consider so-called spiritual or energetic, but it's a property of the material, not separate from that material.
So like we have solids, fluids, gas, and also some other substances
that have different properties that we, quote, think of as spiritual or psychic or psychological or something.
So it's like still physical, but not discovered yet. That's
correct.
What we can call.
Yeah, because who's looking? I mean, you're talking nanometers. If you don't know where to look, you'd never find it, right? And the only reason we found it is because we're rummaging around inside the cell. Okay,
we covered a lot of stuff, so maybe some wrap-up sentence?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I appreciate that. I think I'd like to wrap up by, again, saying we want to address practical problems. That's stuff you can measure, the suffering of people. Yeah, and we've worked with the subcellular model in the primary cell because we needed to be able to approach these problems like engineering. We had to say, okay, this has a psychological component, and here's the biology, and you need to do this and this and the other thing. Yeah? I think that's... and then we threw in the charge for results because as we develop processes, we want to make sure that we're living the golden rule, treating others like we want ourselves to be treated. You go take your car in for repair, and they charge you money and they don't repair the car. How do you feel? I don't feel good. I sure as heck don't want other people to have that experience with the stuff that I'm working on. So I think for people who are watching this, if you come away from this talk, this is a new field of biology and of science. It marries psychology and biology together in a way that allows you to make change, measurable, observable change, and for different problems that people have never been able to understand before because they weren't looking in the right place inside the cells. It's exciting for me because as an engineer, it reminds me of being back in the 80s when the computer revolution was happening. A whole new technology, a new way to address problems that had never been addressed before. This understanding of the primary cell and how psycho-immunology works, how you can actually do this, is brand new. And it's really exciting to be in the forefront of that. The bad news is it's a new technology. That means just like new computers, they don't do what you want. You got problems, stuff like that. But each year it gets better. Just like each year your iPhone gets better. Yeah. So it's. I hope I can share that excitement with who's watching, that we can finally marry our understanding of science, the world, and biology to an understanding of traditional spiritual practices, to an understanding of psychology, and health and illness and exceptional states of consciousness all together in one cohesive model, and do stuff with it. Yeah, maybe not today, maybe next year, maybe in 2 years, but we're finally fixing the radio and not using spaghetti to do it. We're using soldering irons and wires and stuff like that, except in this case it's biology and consciousness.
Super. Thank you a lot for sharing that with us.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank you. Thank you.